Hello again. I'm Angela Taylor, your host for Unlocking the Club. And thank you once again for joining us for another episode. Today, I actually want to talk about those moments when you put undue pressure on yourself. And this has shown up for me personally and in observation of some of my clients, both in one-on-one coaching sessions and group coaching sessions. But those instances where I find myself putting undue pressure on myself typically show up in two ways. One is when I need to advocate for myself the most, right? When no one else is there to advocate for me. And when this is the moment, this is the opportunity for me to get that thing that I've so desired for a long time, or to make a request that has been, lingering out there for a long time, and I didn't hesitate to do it. When I need to advocate for myself, I put a lot of pressure on myself, oftentimes delaying the actual ask or advocacy that needs to happen. And the second time it shows up for me in particular is when I'm interacting with those whose opinion I highly value. And this didn't really start to become clear to me until maybe about midstream through my corporate career. And I started to notice those moments where I felt a little bit more overwhelmed coming over me. I felt a little bit more stress in preparation for an activity, event, or project or conversation that I was going to have. And once I started to notice that, I actually stepped back a little bit and was trying to figure out what was a trend that was taking place. And the trend was, it wasn't in every situation. It was particularly in those situations where there was someone I highly value, maybe a friend or family member who means a lot to me, or a peer that I have a ridiculous amount of respect for and want to impress, want them to think that I am good at what I do or know what I'm talking about. Or in groups that maybe I wasn't quite sure if how they saw me or if I fit in or not. And I would find myself putting a lot of pressure for those moments. And so recently was in a conversation in a workshop with some clients who had been showing up really powerfully when they were advocating for others. And they were extremely hesitant when they actually were even considering standing up for themselves. And I recognize that this is a thing. It's not just for some of us some of the time, it's for many of us many times. And I recognize that when fighting for themselves in this workshop, when we were asking them to advocate for themselves, they actually didn't want to come across as the angry Black woman in this particular case. And it made me think about the Zora Neale Thurston quote: if you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. Right? If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. On one hand, when someone else, maybe a team member or someone who was a direct report of theirs, needed support or help, they would go to bat for this individual without hesitation. But on the other hand, when it was something that they needed to fight for, or something that maybe was causing them some pain or stress or overwhelm, they were silent. And I think when we're silent, people misunderstand what our silence indicates. They may think that we are fine, we're okay, and we haven't allowed them into what's actually going on and what's important to us. And so I just want us to think about, when are those moments that you put undue pressure on yourself? Some specific moments for me was when about 2 years ago, actually it was before COVID, I had applied for TED Talk Boise and was accepted and invited to deliver a TED Talk at TEDx Boise, and was really excited about it and started sending invitation out to some family members and some friends. But I didn't send it to my extended friends list. And one of my colleagues had asked, like, why aren't you inviting so-and-so and so-and-so? And I hadn't even thought about it. And as we continued to have that conversation, I actually said, you know what? I wasn't sure if they would want to come to this event. And then I continued to unpack it and dig into it. And it wasn't that I wasn't sure if they would want to attend the event. I was nervous that if I invited them to the event, maybe it wouldn't meet their expectations. Maybe they would be disappointed in me. Maybe they would have a different perspective of who I was and how I was showing up. And they challenged me, my friends challenged me to send out invites to one and all. And you would be surprised at who would say yes. And so I did. I sent out invites. Unfortunately, COVID happened and I was not able to do the TEDx Boise talk, but it was a lesson to me. Was sometimes, again, we edit ourselves and tell ourselves all these stories that may or may not be true, as opposed to just getting to the bottom of the situation. There are other situations. Sometimes on these podcasts, I have some amazing guests, as you all have experienced, that are on our show. Today is another one. And sometimes you get really nervous about, are they going to have a good time on the show? Is it going to be an enjoyable experience for them? Is it going to be worth their time, right? These are busy individuals. Will it be worth their time being on this show? And I had to pause and trust the work that I put in, the experience that people are having on the show, and just put out the invites and do the work that is required to make sure I'm prepared for each of these interviews. So I think that this happens for many of us more frequently than we probably would admit. And something that has helped me along the way is actually just pause. Again, you've heard that so often in these podcasts, just pausing and reflecting and getting to the root of the issue, getting to understand better why you may be reluctant to do something or ask for something that means a lot to you. And once you can decide or determine what that is, maybe you can unpack that a little bit and distill the weight of that burden in order to allow you to move forward with it. So the big thing I would suggest is to trust yourself in those moments. Trust yourself and all the work that you have done, and believe that people believe in you as well. And there's so many things that will come out on the other side of that when you do. And one of those things is the experience that we're going to have on today's show with our special guest on Unlocking the Club, Bethany Hawkins. I actually connected with Bethany as a result of listening to a podcast on a flight as I was thinking about starting a podcast. And there was a gap in my experience level and expertise, and I wasn't quite sure how to close that gap. And luckily on this podcast, Bethany was being interviewed and was talking about her company and her podcast consulting. And I decided to reach out. And lo and behold, Bethany responded, and the rest is history. We've been working together for several months. And I know that Unlocking the Club would not be in the position that it's in today if it wasn't for her expert guidance. And so I look forward to having a conversation with Bethany, not just about what she does with her company, Crackers and Soup, but also about who she's had to be along the way in the journey. So our special guest on today's episode of Unlocking the Club is Bethany Hawkins.
Welcome to the Unlocking the Club podcast, where we host honest and direct conversations about journeys of access, personal truth, and reclaiming space. We share our truth so that you can find the key to own your truth, honor your journey, and reclaim your space. Grab your keys, your wallet, your phone, and invite your friends to meet you at the club. Here's your host, Angela Taylor.
Today on Unlocking the Club, I'll be joined by Bethany Hawkins. Bethany is the CEO and founder of Crackers and Soup. Crackers and Soup is a podcast management company with a mission to assist women podcast hosts that need the best F word known in the English language, freedom. Since its inception in 2019, Crackers and Soup has worked on over 70 podcasts, from creating cover art to helping women create their podcast vision through launches. Bethany has worked on podcasts that have won awards, including her own, podcasts that have 3 million listeners, and one podcast she worked on was featured in a Princeton course. Bethany is also the host of the award-winning podcast, Chatting Over Chowder. Chatting Over Chowder is a podcast where two minority women talk to other women in the podcasting industry about what podcasts they listen to while eating chowder. Sounds amazing. And Bethany is amazing. So thanks for tuning in as we unlock the club with Bethany Hawkins. Bethany, hey, welcome to Unlocking the Club on the other side of the camera this time. How are you doing today?
There was so much love and so much hype. I was so enthralled with your prelude. I was like, oh, wait, I'm going to be speaking soon. I guess I should get myself together because I am wrapped up in the introduction to this episode.
Yes.
I could absolutely relate and resonate so much with what you were saying in regard to pressure and showing up for other people. But it's very hard to show up for yourself in the same way and champion yourself and kind of have this braggadocious attitude when it comes to you and all of the work that you do. So yes, I was all in it. When I edit this, I'm still going to be listening and I'm going to be like, oh, wow, that was so poignant.
Well, there might be a lot of editing that is required for sure. Well, it is an honor to have you on the show for a variety of different reasons. Certainly the work that you're doing and how much we are all learning through you on Unlocking the Club, but the work that you're doing industry wide, like you literally are unlocking the podcast industry. And my eyes have been open to the depth of opportunity for women and women of color in the podcast industry. Share a little bit about like your journey and what brought you to this point in your career.
So, ironically enough, I did not go to school for audio engineering. My degrees and my certifications are in criminal justice, which do not fare well for the audio world. So, when I was younger, I wanted to be a juvenile probation officer. And then I was contemplating being an attorney. So, my journey led me to all the way through criminal justice. I got my degree, I got my certification in paralegalism. And I had only worked in two offices for about 20 years. One was the district attorney's office and another was the defense attorney's office. And I had gone back to the district attorney's office when I decided that I was going to embark on this endeavor as a podcast creator. And how I ended up getting there was I was extremely burnt out. I was in the criminal justice world for 18 plus years, which is like 112 years in real life.
Right.
But who's counting? Right? It's like dog years. And I was just exhausted. And I was trying to find an outlet to kind of allow me to do all of the tasks and duties that were my responsibility throughout the day, as well as not have the panic attacks that I was having regularly when I was driving to work, during work, when I was leaving work. Because I refused to listen to my body, because as a Black woman growing up in a Black household, I had a quote unquote stable job. I had a good job. I had a job that had retirement. I had a job that had quote unquote good benefits. And that's all really my parents' generation wanted for their children. Yes. Is to have a job that was quote unquote stable. And I had met that criteria. Check, 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 check. However, there was never a discussion regarding mental health and what happens when you're in that environment and your mental health is significantly depleted. And there wasn't the discussion of maybe if you went and saw a therapist, you could maybe work through this. It was go, 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 go. Because you have to work twice as hard. Because I was in the hierarchy of the office, it was the district attorney, it was the deputy district attorney, and then it was myself. So I had to go before the board of commissioners and I had to ask for money for positions and I had to articulate why the $1 million budget was what it was and what we were using these funds for. And I had to write grants and proposals for different positions. And it was a very important position. And yet it was in a state where it was the majority of white. It was a very small population of minorities. And then I would go up there in front of the Board of Commissioners with a lot of very elderly Republican men, Caucasian men. And I would have like my hair out, and my hair is in a bun right now, but it's very curly and it's very big. And I would have to curtail my speech. I would have to make sure that I was speaking properly, quote unquote, or have good dictation. And all of this little minutiae that you have to do to kind of dull your light over time is exhausting. And you think that it's not problematic until it starts arising in ways that you can't ignore, like when you're driving into work and you're having panic attacks. So the thing that got me through the last 3 years before I was like, bye, I'm out, is podcasts. My friend had come up to me and she knows that I am a LeVar Burton freak. I love LeVar Burton. For all of you young buckaroos who are listening to this, LeVar Burton, you may know him in Star Trek. I know him from LeVar Burton Reads. I was like, that's Uncle LeVar to me. Some people may know him from Roots. Like LeVar Burton was my whole uncle. I just envisioned him owing me a lot of birthday presents because he was just so busy that he didn't have time to take me out to dinner for my birthday. But I will have that happen one day. And she said, he has this podcast, LeVar Burton Reads, and he literally reads stories to you. And I was like, oh, like the dawn opened up, the sun came out. LeVar Burton's going to read to me? And she said, yeah, it's in a podcast. And I said, girl, I don't know what a podcast is. So she took my phone, she took my Android, because I'm an Android all day. All you Apple people, God bless, but I'm a droider. And all day. And she got me on Castbox, which is one of the most popular podcast distribution stations for Androids. And I looked up LeVar Burton Read and I started listening and I binged, Angela. I binged. I listened to so many stories and I was like, well, what is this podcast thing? And then I started looking into women who looked like me, women who were talking about owning their own businesses. I started listening to women talk about the microaggressions that they were experiencing in their lives. And I was like, I'm not the only one. And it was an ongoing joke in the building, the entire courthouse, that I was the only Black person, not only the only Black woman, the only Black person. And it was like a joke that I could never get fired because I was the token. And at the time, it's like, ha, 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 ha. But it's like, that's not funny.
Yeah. Wait, let's unpack that a little bit. So who was part of that joke? Like, was it just a running joke that all the white Caucasian men that you were working with that were sharing? And how did you consume that?
It was just an ongoing joke within the office. And it's funny because it goes back to what you were saying earlier in the beginning of this conversation. When I am advocating for somebody else, I will go hard. But when the attention is drawn on myself, I use wit and clever and my intelligence. And I use the ability to make a joke to take the eyes off of the seriousness when it's being directed at me. So that's where I would kind of direct it. And, like all of the great comedians, right, all have trauma and that's why they're great comedians, because they use that trauma and they make people laugh and people can relate to it. That's how I dealt with it. And there was interactions when this attorney come up to me and he'd be like, oh, you're celebrating Kwanzaa? And I was like, what? And I would report it back to my district attorney. And she was like, oh, well, that's just how he is. So that kind of behavior, I had one attorney say right in front of my area, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, that's a joke. And then I had to go into her office and tell her and have a very serious conversation with somebody about that being problematic, especially with complete disregard for the only Black woman in the office, and you're saying Black lives don't matter. And this was before George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah.
So it was all of these little things that added up that I didn't realize that I was internalizing to the point where it was detrimental to my health. And hearing people that spoke like me and had the same experience as me, and how they shared how they created a company so that they could pick and choose who they want to engage with, who they want to work with. I was like, I had never heard anything like this before, because I don't have any entrepreneurs in my family.
Right.
So I was like the first, and my entire family thought that I had lost my ever-loving mind. And I got to a point where I'm a researcher at heart. That's what I do. Like I said, I have certifications in paralegalism, which is just vast research after vast research. So I started looking at courses. I started purchasing courses. I started taking courses. So I would be working from 8 to 5. I'd get my daughter. I'd make dinner and I'd just be working on my business until midnight. And then I would get up and I'd do it all over again. And once I created all of the courses that I had to take and I created my website, at that point, I decided that there was nothing else that I could do. There were no more excuses. And I went in and I handed in my resignation.
Wow. The look on your face now, right? If you were to go back then and realize where you would be today, what would you tell Bethany when she's sitting at her desk and people are cracking jokes at your expense?
If I had a time machine and I'd go back And I'd be like, hey, this is what you're going to be doing in 3 years. I'd be like, bitch, you lying. Like, it's so outside of the scope of anything that I was in classical education for.
Yeah.
But now that I have run a business, now that we are over 3 years and it is successful and the definition of success in a business, I am so glad that I had those experiences because all of those transferable skills I am able to bring into my company. I know how to write contracts. I know how to be organized. I know how to have a structure. And it's so beneficial for my clientele because if the person that you're working with already has a structure in place and you just have to upload audio and upload guest host information and everybody knows where it's going and when it's due, that just makes the whole transition so much easier and the whole experience so much easier. Where if I didn't have all of those transferable skills to fall back on, I probably would have been a fish out of water. And I think that that's how a lot of businesses don't succeed, even in the first year, because they don't have that set up from the get-go.
Yes, no, for sure. Well, and I'm noticing like through this arc that you outlined and vividly gave us, right, what your journey has been like, the emphasis on the doing and the actions and activity and a bit of stepping over the being. Like, so while you were discovering all of these characteristics and traits that you were really good at, while you were consuming all of this information that would help you start your business and build a successful business, you also were going through a situation that wasn't healthy, right? The juxtaposition that you had between wanting to be the comedian, right, and tell a joke and feeling debilitated from what somebody was saying is, I think, an interesting one that Black women and people that are inside of marginalized identities deal with all of the time. And I don't think it's something we should take lightly. I think it's actually something that we should talk about more, is that what do you do in that moment? In that moment, it sounds like to me, and you tell me if it's otherwise, you were helping to make them feel comfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it was twofold. It's self-preservation, because when you're in that situation, it either turns into, as you spoke of earlier, Black angry woman, or it turns into Black woman teacher, where I now have to educate you on why that was inappropriate, or it's make them laugh and move on. So there are so many different hats that marginalized people wear for self-preservation.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is innately natural to them? And sometimes even going the education route becomes exhausting, because then people are saying to you, oh, well, can you tell me more about this? No, you got Google. I know you have Google. I see your Google history. Look it up.
Right. I walk by your computer every day and see you not doing
And
work.
I see you not doing work. So while you're listening to like the newest, I don't know, YouTube trend or Twitter trend, like go research why that verbiage or that phraseology that you said to me is inappropriate. Like, come on. I think it's important for anybody who is in, and I hate the word position of power, but anybody who has people reporting to them. I tell my team members this all the time. And I've been very fortunate where I've been able to grow my business. So it's not just me. Other people assist me in all of the work that we have for our clients. And I tell them, I'm not infallible. If there is something that I have said or a manner in which I have said it that has upset you, please come to me, because I will immediately listen to you and I will immediately fall on my sword and apologize.
Absolutely.
And I think that I wouldn't have the strength to say that if I hadn't had people who were above me that didn't do that for me.
Yes. Right. And so it goes back to the ability to advocate for others because of our learned experience, right, is it's innate in us because we do it all the time because we're trying to model what we hope others do for us. Like, right, it's almost like we're just begging for someone to see us, to see what we're going through, and to model how we show up in those moments. And it reminds me of the Zora Neale Thurston quote, right? If you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it, right? In those moments when you went into the office of a superior, right, and said, this is what just happened, and they're like, oh, it's just who he is, right? Like, I know we have a lot of listeners who are allies, who want to be allies and accomplices. Like, these are the moments where, again, we can't always be the one that is having to tell you, show you, demonstrate to you, like, that you need to see and notice how you can show up. And it reminds me, Beth, and I'm not sure if you saw this discourse on social media recently. There was, I believe, someone who is a scientist, and I may be wrong about her occupation, but a PhD student had written a letter, an application to study at this lab. And the letter was directed to Dear Sir, right? And so she's the head of the lab. So first and foremost, right, someone wasn't taking the time, but probably shorthand thought that 9 out of 10 folks that are running these labs and research institutes are probably men. And in the letter says something to the effect that I don't work well with women. So please don't put me in situations. I'm really good at what I do, but don't put me in situations where I'm working with a woman. And so she put it on Twitter and was like, here was my response. And here was my response, not to him, but to the people that he listed as references. It was like, here's what, like, not sure if this is your student, if he listed you as a reference without your approval, but this is how he's showing up. And one of the references that she contacted wrote back to her and said, he's really good at what he does. He's a really good student. You should give him a chance anyway.
The audacity!
That audacity is what shows up. That is the climate, right? That leads to that debilitation, that mental health, the overwhelm that, women of color, Black women, folks that come from, historically excluded identities are having all the time is we're going to give that person a second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth chance because of who they are or who they could be. And we are going to completely ignore what just transpired and how that can be debilitating to you. And so in that moment, like those choices that we make in those moments, I think really learning lesson that we have from your experience, that was a catalyst for you learning and leaving.
And I think that is such a disservice to the individual who wrote that letter. Yeah. Because as you said, that could have been such a poignant learning lesson that he could have changed the climate around him. Because if he is writing this in a formal letter, in an application process, you cannot tell me that he is walking the streets treating women with such respect and dignity. He is a whole nightmare of a person. And maybe if that person, instead of alibying his actions because he does good work, had pulled him aside and said, this is not going to work. You may do exceptional work and you may be brilliant, but you also have to engage with people. And here's a fun fact. People are bred and born from women. So if you don't like women,
it's a problem.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
Oh, that is just tomfoolery and ballyhoo.
It is. And it's something that I think probably there's been so much that's come to light over the last couple of years. So some of the things that used to be said in silence or in the dark are now out, right, in the light. And I think it's really important for us to understand like what that does to us. We talked quite often on some previous episodes about this data that came out over the last couple of years when companies were returning to work, about how Black women in particular are reluctant to go back into the workplace. And so you talk about that every time that you have to edit what you're going to say, you have to work twice as hard. You have to know what you're saying before you're saying it. You have to do the research, all those things that you have to do. That's on, 100 miles an hour every single day, every single moment of every day. And no wonder it could feel so heavy and as such a burden. And yet and still, you show up powerfully.
And even hair. even things such as our hair. So I would periodically straighten my hair if I was having an event, or I just wanted to straighten my hair. And I would have people come up to me and say, "Oh, did you put a weave in?"
Oh, wow.
No. If you know anything about hair, there's this thing called shrinkage. Again, look it up. It's on Google. Or people wanting to touch my hair. And people touching anything on anybody's body without an invitation
Yes.
just needs to stop all around the board. And my friend and I were talking, and she was leaning over, and I slapped her on the butt when I was like, it was after hours. We were just all leaving. And I was immediately like, oh my God, I am so sorry. So it's not just like things that I've experienced, but I also have to own the things that I've done and reflect on that and be like, what was my head doing? That was poor life choice. And I immediately was like, that was horrid. And I have never done that since. But having the ability to not only learn from your experiences, but learn from the things that you've done as well, and really hear people, not just listen, but really hear people when they share. Because if they're sharing a story with you, number one, they're trusting you.
Yeah.
Somebody trusting you shouldn't be something that you just disregard. Trust is a hard thing. And being vulnerable is a hard thing. So if you have people in your life that are opening up to you and saying, hey, I had this experience and it's uncomfortable for me to talk to you about it. And also, they're not usually going to say it's uncomfortable for me to talk to you about, but you can tell their voice starts to quiver. There's a hesitancy there. Look at the body language. And I think that is why also I love podcasting so much, because in audio, you can truly hear emotion. There are no context clues. For the people who are watching the video, you can see my expression. You can see that I'm smiling. You can see that I'm like, hi, Angela. Hi, cutie. But if I was talking to you and I wasn't smiling, when I stopped smiling, there's a very definite tone change. And people can feel that when they're listening. It's such a more intimate engagement than watching something on video. Yeah. It really, I'm like scientific studies.
No, it really is. And we should unlock this, because what I find from each of our episodes is, so we'll record it, and as we're having these conversations, there's different nuggets that I'll pick up and a sense that I have about the conversation, how it was going, what I was excited about in that discourse. And then typically afterwards, after the audio and video are edited, I'll watch the video and I'll listen to the audio, sometimes multiple times. And it is a very different experience that you have if you are watching a conversation versus if you are just listening. And I recommend both for different reasons, right? Like in the discourse and the conversation, just in the audio, you really are listening to the tone and the tenor of the conversation. And there is a lot that you pick up. And I think that that's important. It's that level 3 listening that we talk about in coaching, right? Of being able to understand what someone is saying without them actually saying something. And then on video, you can see the interaction and the engagement and how your energy feeds off of my energy and vice versa, and someone's expressions. And when they're about to say something, you kind of know where they're going to go with it. So it's a really interesting experience. But like podcasting in and of itself, what has it taught you about yourself?
Podcasting has actually made me a better conversationalist. So it has allowed me to active listen.
Yes.
It has allowed me to be very cognizant about interjecting and allowing somebody to share their commentary without me pouncing what I'm thinking about on top of them. And it truly has also allowed me to formulate my thoughts. And I have a very specific cadence. I have a very specific speech. People that have edited for me, they're like, I love you because you'll pause for like 10 seconds.
that East Coast Boston.
Is that East Coast Boston. So like smushing a sentence together is a lot easier if there is pauses in between versus somebody just, and I talk very quickly. So if I didn't have that pause every now and then, my editors would just be like, I hate you. Just do it yourself. And I'd be like, okay, I understand. So learning how to communicate truly has been something that I didn't anticipate in this journey. And I'm loving it. Learning how to hold my values in everything that I do. Learning how to connect with people that I want to connect with and feeling okay with saying, I'm sure you are a great person and also you're not my person.
Right. Yeah.
And I've had to do that because there were times in my business, and a lot of fresh new business owners do this. They're like, we need to get revenue in. I'm going to take any client that comes my way, or I'm going to take any opportunity that comes my way. And all of a sudden, you're engaging with these people and you don't really care for them. Yeah. And you're questioning why they're even working with you. And then you're doing phenomenal work. So then they're introducing you to your friends who are just like them. And you're like, oh my God, I have more people that I hate.
Cycle.
And you're snowballing in this cesspool of clients who aren't your people. And you're like, how do I climb out of this?
Yeah.
But being able to say, I think your idea is phenomenal, but I'm not the person for you, and that is okay. Let me give you a couple of names that I think can really help you create your vision. And standing strong in that and knowing that that money isn't the end all be all of the money that's going to come into your business.
Yeah, yeah. Which is trusting yourself, because if you're going from all the messages that you were hearing from family and friends about why you should stay in that job, right? You're making a nice solid paycheck, you got benefits, right? Why would you leave? You have to trust yourself to say no to business as an entrepreneur and say yes to the right type of business.
It's so true.
So as I'm listening to you, that active listening that you speak of, I believe that sometimes we show up in ways that we hope others show up for us. Right? So as you continue to develop those active listening skills, where is it that you want to be heard more?
Oh, this is such a dope question. Angela, I wasn't ready for this one. I've been very fortunate where I have been allowed opportunities to be on many different platforms and many different summits. And I think that what has surprised me that I truly really enjoy is coaching. I had a lot of, it was so unexpected, people reaching out to me saying, I never knew that podcast managers or producers could make 6 figures in a year. And then I ran across an article about you. Or I never knew somebody that looked like me could do so exceptionally well in this industry. And I started giving people advice in DMs and like, okay, this is how I did it. This is what I concentrated on, structure, mindset, blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm sick of sliding into people's DMs. Like, I'm just going to create a coaching program, which is something that I never in a million years would have anticipated that I was going to do.
Yeah.
And I have had 2 group cohorts. Every single one of those cohort members have said to me, my business is infinitely better because I went through this program. And like, I'm like, ah, because I am very cognizant of who I vet into that program. I make sure that not only that they're ready, but that their deliverables are ready. Because if I'm going to advise that you increase your price, you better have a product that's worth increasing your price.
Right, right.
So being somebody that people look to as a thought leader, which is just such a wild concept, or coach, or somebody that they look up to as being a mentor, that's something that I didn't anticipate, but I kind of found myself there, which is wild because I am, I'm super goofy. So
Right. But I'm also noticing, like, right when you went there, you said thought leader, the way you said thought leader, like there's a tangible visceral something that does to you, right? Why is that important? What's important about it being a mentor and a coach and a thought leader?
I think it's important because there are so many in the entertainment industry. And that's how I view podcasting. I view it as an entertainment industry. And my hope and my goal and my desire is to get so many voices who historically have been just crushed into the ground and not heard, and or their ideas were stolen with complete disregard.
Yeah.
And I want podcasting to be an opportunity, because it is so young, for historically marginalized people to be the creators, not just to be the hosts, to be on the front line, but I want them behind the scenes, because behind the scenes, that's where you create the narrative. That's where you can create the story. That's where you get the creativity. That's how you curtail the flow of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize the power of producing, the power of editing, the power of creating the story.
Yeah.
And if you have a whole bunch of people who are brown skinned in all different shades, in all different ways, people who speak many different languages, people whose native tongue is not English, in that background, and they're sharing their stories, and there is no gatekeeping in that, forget about it. Forget about it. And right now, there's no gatekeeping in podcasting. So before there is gatekeeping, I want to get as many people in here. I'm like, welcome everybody. I'm like, this is Disney World, but you don't have to pay.
Right. You're Oprah and you get a podcast and you get a podcast. Come on in. Why is that important to you, Bethany?
It's important to me because it's ludicrous that people had a fit because a little black girl played Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
That's why it's important to me.
An absolute fit.
The tantrums.
Yes. Unbelievable.
That's why. That's why. Because of that stupidity and that ignorance. That's why it's important to me. Because it shouldn't even be a thing. And yet here we are, 2022, same nonsense, different day.
Yeah. Was that a thing for you at different places on your journey?
I didn't realize as I was growing up how I didn't have a lot of representation. I really didn't have any representation. I never had a Black teacher, and I graduated from college and I have certifications. So I had College Plus, and I've never had a Black teacher. And when we watched television, we would watch, The Cosby Show, and we would watch A Different World, which is 35 years old, which I was like, wow.
Unbelievable. It feels like just yesterday
I was not ready for that. But we would watch those type of shows, but the majority of them, we'd watch Kate and Allie and Golden Girls, and it told all of these different stories. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the Black shows that we had, every episode had a message.
Yeah.
We're in and I'm totally dating myself. We're in Kate and Allie, it was just their experiences being two widowed women who lived together and had kids. It didn't always have to have an impactful message. It was just two women living their lives. Black people can't live their lives on TV.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
We always have to be stopped by the cops, or it always has to be a thing.
Or exceptional, right? You just can't be normal. Exactly.
Just can't live lives. So that representation is so important when people are just sharing their stories of being a human who just happens to be in a Black body.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so important.
Kudos to you for creating that, right? And continuing to build it. I will have to tell you, my first experience, as I mentioned in the opening with Crackers and Soup, was, again, 30,000 feet in the air on a flight back from San Francisco, listening to podcasts. And we are in the descent into Boise when I'm like, let me look up Crackers and Soup online. And so I was typing in your URL, right, crackersandsoup.com, as the Wi-Fi on the plane went out. Right. And I was like, oh, okay, I have to remind myself as soon as I land, like I have to make sure that I pin this page and get to it because I want to hear more. I want to see the work and the services that Crackers and Soup does. So eventually, by the time I got home, I had left a message for myself. I texted myself to check out Crackers and Soup because as I get older, sometimes I forget what it was that I needed to do, and I got on crackersandsoup.com and went from page to page, and I saw the podcast. Looked at the cover art that you and your colleague Caroline have done. And it was imagery that reflected the Black community or people of color. I looked at the languaging, right? It felt familiar. And throughout this journey, the process, like the art was really important to me. And that was leading to some angst. Like I was like, how am I going to close this gap? How am I going to find someone who can bring this vision to life? I knew what I wanted, but I'm not an artist. I didn't know how you can graphically create that. And the process has been fantastic. And we get a lot of compliments about our cover art and our branding. And it's because of you and your team at Crackers and Soup. But so important, right, that we have someone who gets this. When I was on the call with Caroline walking through, I want some silhouettes of Black women, different shades, different skin tones, different hairstyles. Like I didn't have to explain what I was going for. Like she got it and we can move on and go to the other granular details that I wanted replicated in this cover art. And so you were creating exactly what it is that you've envisioned. How does it feel when you are working with a client and you're bringing the vision to life?
So firstly, now you got me reclamped because I never heard that reflected back to me before. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Because I don't think that was what I intended to do. It's just what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I would love to say, as I'm tearing up, I would love to say that it was my idea to showcase I don't want to say the Black woman experience, but that's kind of what happened.
Yeah.
Because I was so intentional with who I wanted to work with.
Yes.
Because I was so intentional with whose voices I wanted to share. And I have worked with amazing white women as well.
Sure.
And they have all been true allies. And the information that they share, just like your podcast, I learn with every single client that I work with in their podcast that I listen to. So I'm kind of at a loss to answer that question because, again, I have never heard what our website experience is like and the much needed sigh of saying, I don't have to explain what this means.
Yeah, it was evident from the start, right? And I'd been on a number of podcast management websites. Like, okay, they do good work. They have great clientele. Fantastic. And I didn't know, I couldn't put 2 and 2 together, right, to get to 4 and knowing what was missing by me not wanting to pull the trigger on any of those opportunities, right? Some folks that are doing great work, but there was something very subtle in being seen, right? And seeing what you all were doing and how you were conveying it. And the sense that, and after our first conversation, that you were home in a way that you didn't have to explain yourself. And I think that exactly what you had talked about earlier in our conversation about being selective about your clients so that you're not, working with someone that you don't care to be in the same room with and then attract more folks like them. Like what you are creating is the ability for us to be ourselves, to create in our own vision allows us to connect with others. It's contagious, right? And I think that that's the thing that we need to unlock, right? So often we're looking to fit into that other club, fit in, right, that square peg into a round hole. And when we lean in and own our own authenticity and vision and power and greatness, it's contagious. And what you're doing in the podcast space, others can do in other spaces, but it will be at the gates, letting people in because you see them and you see what they bring to the table. And it's very much appreciated.
I love that. Thank you. That's a whole word. It's so funny. I was actually asked to be interviewed for an article or a blog that's going to be written in the future. And one of the questions was monetization in podcasts, and how do you advise your clientele regarding monetization for podcasts? And I said, and you know this, I said, I truly say to them, what do you enjoy? Because that's the sponsorship that I want you to have. And it could be completely unrelated to your podcast, but if you enjoy it, you're going to promote it. Reach out to those person, develop a rapport, develop a relationship. How many times have I told you, develop a relationship?
Yep.
And I said to her, I don't think I do anything like the quote unquote industry norms say you should do it, because I don't relate to them. I relate to my company. I relate to my clientele. I relate to my people. And my company, my people, my clients, we're all about connection. And it's not just blindly reaching out to people who you've never listened to anything that they've ever done and saying, hey, I want a piece of you. Give me a piece of you. I deserve to have a piece of you. No, it's, I want to know more about you.
Yeah.
I want to learn about you. I want to learn your story. I want you to share your experiences. And then I want to tell you about me. And then if we can get together and connect and collaborate in some way, amazing. But if we can't, thank you for the opportunity to learn more about a new soul.
Yes. Absolutely.
So I don't do anything like the industry people.
Right. Which is important, right? Because this is the standard, right? And you're supposed to try to fit into that box. But I think what we're all starting to learn is let's start to create our own box.
Yes.
Right. And the truth of the matter is, whether it is the messages we're told about our hair, right, from a young age, it should look like this or that, how we should dress, how we should talk, how we show, whatever it is, all those messages of fitting into someone else's vision of what you're supposed to be, regardless of your identity, right? Regardless of your identity, oftentimes I think we find ourselves looking like the grass is greener, right? And so let me try to fit in over there. And if you spend your time actually elevating and amplifying the things that you're passionate about, the things that you're good at, the things that bring you joy and happiness, you can create a lot from that space. But I think, unfortunately, all the messages we hear is we have to fit over there. We have to do that. It has to look like that. And so if you were to give someone who is on their way up the ladder some advice from your journey, what would that bit of advice be, Bethany?
My advice would be have real friends and have a really great therapist.
Real friends and a really great therapist. And that's another episode right there, about both, right? Real friends and a real therapist, and not being embarrassed about seeking therapy, right? We actually need to normalize it. And everybody, and Therapy for Black Girls is a fantastic resource. And I think it's something, particularly in the Black community, that we need to talk about more and to normalize and not make it that thing that should be hidden or, only said in private or in secret. So I appreciate that advice. And I know you have so many additional nuggets to share with our listeners. You're listening to Bethany Hawkins here on Unlocking the Club. I'm your host, Angela Taylor, and we will be right back on the back nine with more of a conversation with Bethany Hawkins. Do you want to stop feeling like you have little to no control over your life's journey and instead amplify your life's purpose? You all know me as Angela Taylor, host of the Unlocking the Club podcast, but I am also a business, career, life, and leadership coach, helping my clients to live their best life. Every day, I help my clients discover what they truly want in life, and then unlock the club on how they can live their best life. If you're like many of my clients, you have found yourself over the years prioritizing everyone else and everything else. Your job, your significant other, your family, your friends, your community, the list goes on and on. Well, I'm here to tell you the best thing you can do for others is to invest in yourself. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to succumb to the fear of failure. You don't have to be perfect. You don't need to feel like you're being selfish. You simply need to prioritize you. You may be thinking that coaching is for other people, but trust me when I say that we all could benefit from a good coaching relationship. Together, we'll build a plan to help you amplify your gifts, clarify your goals, and accelerate your journey toward the life you desire, which may be finding financial wealth, spiritual health, relationship success, and/or freedom and flexibility. You no longer have to feel like you aren't welcome into someone else's club. Let me empower you to leverage all of your extraordinary gifts and create your own club. Head on over to unlockingtheclub.com to book a free 20-minute introductory call to learn more about our Unlocking Your Journey coaching packages, or use code UNLOCK to get a 15% discount on the 6-month coaching package. Today is the day to invest in yourself. Let's unlock your journey. All right, we're here on Unlocking the Club. I am joined by our special guest, Bethany Hawkins, the CEO and founder of Crackers and Soup. And we've been having a great conversation about finding your own box, your own space, and your own authentic voice. And Bethany, just gave some great advice. You just gave some great advice to our listeners. I'm wondering, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received and from whom? Like too many to count.
So I will say this. It's not really advice, but okay. I am a part of this cohort of phenomenal women, different stages of entrepreneurship, different areas of entrepreneurship. And we talk about the ebbs and the flows of business and sharing that having your own business can sometimes be terrible. It can be a terrible experience. And people don't really talk about that. They're like, oh my God, I've made like $12,000 months. But they don't talk about the next month that they made like $500. So I guess that the best advice that I have received from them is business can be beautiful and business can also be terrible. It's all about riding out both waves.
It's so true. Like both are true. And if you were to look at the map of so many entrepreneurs, there's so much data out there, right? Like it literally is that roller coaster. And so often you hear small business owners, they stop after the first year or so when they hit that first big dip, right? And if you can sustain, there's so much learning in that. If you can get through it, you're even stronger on the way back up. So I think that's a great perspective and insight for sure. I actually want to dig into the entrepreneurship. You mentioned it earlier, like you didn't know any entrepreneurs. This actually came up on a recent episode with Lenora Williams Clark, who grew up in South Central LA and was saying that entrepreneur was a word for other people. I didn't know any entrepreneurs. And then thought about like in their lives, this actually came up with Cherie Buckner Webb as well. They had people in your community or family that were business owners, like whether it was gardening or had a little corner store, there were a lot of people that were business owners, but we as Black people in particular didn't understand what entrepreneurship was. And I know for me, I thought it was, the folks that start Apple or these tech companies or these big conglomerates. But what is it like being an entrepreneur? What does it take to be an entrepreneur?
I think it takes perseverance. I think it takes knowing yourself. I think it takes you being able to say, today I can do this. Yesterday I had to snuggle with my weighted blanket for 12 hours.
Okay, so it's not just me. Okay.
I think it also takes having your people. And I know that I keep emphasizing this, but community is so important. Somebody that you can unabashedly say, I screamed into my pillow and they're not going to judge you. Someone that you can say, hey, I'm having a really hard time. And I think entrepreneurship also means that if it is becoming problematic to your finances to the point of you're unable to pay your bills and there's no stability, getting a 9-to-5 job and being employed by somebody else is okay. You do not have to suffer for your business to that extent.
Yeah.
Like, people are so afraid of being considered a failure. But the fact that you tried and you took that leap, and so many people just talk about it and don't be about it. So I think giving yourself permission, whatever that permission is also really important to being an entrepreneur.
That is so important. I 100% agree with you. Permission to actually want to make money. Because I think sometimes we actually edit ourselves and don't want people to think that you're being greedy. Like, right? So permission to knock it out of the park and to make money. Permission to ask for help. Because asking for help, particularly if you're in a marginalized identity, does not mean that you're not capable, right? It actually means that you're moving places and you want to leverage someone else who may be better at a different thing than you are, right? And then I agree that last piece is failure. I don't think we talk about failure enough because we learn so often. Like, I am in a much better place today in my businesses because my first business was a train wreck, right? And I didn't ask for help. And I didn't know what I was endeavoring to do. Like, right? Like, I didn't set financial goals, right? And I didn't talk to others about the failures. So I love that. Thanks for sharing that. Give yourself permission. A couple of more questions for you, Bethany. I'm curious for you, like, beside your home there on the East Coast, and maybe while you're eating chatter, beside eating chatter and at your home, where do you feel the safest to be yourself?
With my husband. My husband and I have known each other for literally 30 years. We were in 8th grade together.
Oh my goodness.
And
the stories you can tell.
That's a story for another day, Angela. And he is the person who knows me the best for all of my good and my bad. And he is the person that I am always feel physically the safest with, as well as mentally the safest with, because we've had a journey. Whew, that's a whole lot of unlocking that club.
Yeah.
That marriage club.
Yeah, stay tuned for that episode. We'll have Bethany back on to talk about that.
So wherever he is, that's where I feel safe.
That's amazing. Like, right, that feels like if you are in a relationship, what you endeavor to have, right, where you feel safe and where everything is reciprocated. I love that. What is a club that you want to unlock?
Oh, I would love to maybe unlock the franchise club. I would love to franchise Crackers and Soup.
All right, let's manifest it. Put it out there. I love it.
I think that would just be so dope.
Just like set it in the same industry or Crackers and Soup?
In the same industry, I would love to have a building where people could learn audio engineering, where people could learn producing, where people could come in and read their audiobooks. I would just love Crackers and Soup to be this major force when it comes to all of the aspects of audio engineering and producing. I'm going to unlock that club.
Let's unlock that club. Speak it into existence. If you believe that you can achieve it. And based on my experience with you over the last 3.5 months, I have no doubt in my mind that you can unlock that club. Bethany, where can people find you and what projects do you have going on?
So people can find me at crackersinsoup.com, and that is our website. People can find us on Instagram at @BCrackersInSoup. People can find us on Twitter. All of my handles are different. It's before I had Cheryline, my right-hand person in my company, and she put me in check in regards to social media. But what can you do? You live and learn. And the things that I am currently working on, I actually was going to be at a Speaker at She podcast, but that was canceled. So I am speaking in a summit in October regarding neurodivergence and business owners. which
Oh, wow.
is super important. As somebody who has been diagnosed with anxiety and all of those things, it's really important to talk about how to fashion your brain for success when you are a business owner. So I will be talking about that. I also have a third cohort opening on October 24th, and we are having the amazing Jeremy Enns, who talks about marketing and podcast, speak this go around. And the cohort is open to podcast business owners. So it doesn't just have to be podcast managers. If you are somebody who is a podcast coach in any way, if you're somebody who does graphics, copywriting, anything in pertaining to podcasting, and that is the sole focus of your business, I invite you to email me at info@crackersandsoup.com. Actually, it's emailing my assistant to learn more about that. I also do one-on-one coaching for podcast business owners. So if you're looking for something a little more intimate, it is a 3-month commitment, and I will get you right. Get you right.
Nice. Trust me, you want her in your corner and on your team for sure if you're ready to unlock the podcasting clubs. Bethany Hawkins of Crackers and Soup, thank you so much for joining us today on Unlocking the Club.
Angela, anytime I get to talk to you, it's a grand old day. And I also have my Unlocking the Club cup. Look,
love it.
Merchandise.
Absolutely. Coming soon.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you.
Well, thanks for joining us on Unlocking the Club. Wow. So another great conversation here on Unlocking the Club. Today I was joined by Bethany Hawkins, the CEO of Crackers and Soup, a podcast management company who is doing so well, so many things. And we're all going to manifest having this franchise that is creating all of those stories that Bethany shared with us. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of Unlocking the Club. I'm your host, Angela Taylor. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to continue the discussion, head on over to Facebook on our Facebook group page called the Codebreakers Lounge, where we'll continue the conversation, talk about some of the lessons that we learned from Bethany, talk about giving yourself permission as an entrepreneur, giving yourself permission as a mother, a sister, an aunt, a friend, and learning how to be authentic and surround yourself with folks who believe in you and believe in your vision so that you can unlock whatever club it is that you want to continue to create and build. Again, we appreciate you joining us on Unlocking the Club. Check out our show notes for where to find Bethany Hawkins. And until next time, be well.
Thanks for listening to Unlocking the Club. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite streaming platform, so that you can experience every episode. And follow us on social media, where you'll hear about future guests, access special features, and connect with this amazing community. Head on over there and let us know how you are unlocking the club. Until next time, peace.